The clatter of carriage wheels against cobblestone jolted Margaret Mansfield awake from her fitful sleep. Through the curtained window, she caught glimpses of Philadelphia's grand homes fading into the distance as dawn broke over the horizon. Her trembling fingers clutched the small leather satchel containing everything she'd managed to grab before escaping her father's mansion: a few dresses, her mother's locket, and nearly every penny she'd secretly saved over the past 3 years. It was May 1873, and at 22 years old, Margaret was fleeing the only life she'd ever known. "Just a few more miles, miss," the driver called back. "Train station's up ahead." Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. Had her father discovered her absence yet? Would Howard Blackwood, the 50-year-old business associate to whom she'd been promised in marriage, already have men searching for her? The thought made her stomach turn. Just yesterday afternoon, she'd stood rigid in her father's study as he'd announced the arrangement as casually as if discussing the weather. "It's all settled, Margaret. You'll marry Howard next month. The merger of our companies depends on it." "Father, please," she'd begged. "I don't even know him." "You don't need to know him," her father had replied coldly. "You need only to be a dutiful wife. Howard needs an heir, and I need this business deal. Your mother would understand the practicality of such an arrangement." But her mother, gone 5 years now, had whispered different dreams to Margaret: dreams of love, of choice, of the vast country that lay beyond Philadelphia's proper society. Dreams that had taken root in Margaret's heart. The carriage lurched to a stop outside the train station. Margaret paid the driver with precious coins from her dwindling funds and hurried inside, keeping her head down beneath her bonnet. The station bustled with early morning travelers, providing welcome anonymity as she approached the ticket counter. "1 ticket to Fort Stockton, Texas, please," she requested, her voice barely above a whisper. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Fort Stockton? That's mighty far for a lady traveling alone. Got family there?" "Yes," she lied smoothly. "My aunt is ill." In truth, she had chosen Fort Stockton from a newspaper article describing the frontier town's growth along the Pecos River. It was far enough from Philadelphia that no one would think to look for her there, yet established enough that a woman might find respectable work. The journey was grueling. For 5 days, Margaret endured cramped train cars, meager meals, and the constant fear of being discovered. She changed trains 3 times, each transfer taking her further west, further from the life that had been planned for her without her consent. By the time she reached the last rail station in West Texas, her fine traveling dress was wrinkled beyond repair, and her boots were scuffed from the countless steps she'd taken between platforms. From there, she boarded a stagecoach for the final leg to Fort Stockton, squeezing in with 5 other passengers: 2 salesmen, an older couple, and a young mother with a sleeping infant. The May heat in Texas was unlike anything Margaret had experienced. It seemed to press down upon the stagecoach like a physical weight, and dust from the trail crept into every fold of clothing. Yet despite her discomfort, Margaret felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest: freedom. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Fort Stockton, the setting sun painted the surrounding desert landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Margaret stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt of the main street, her legs wobbly after so many hours of travel. Fort Stockton was smaller than she'd imagined. A single main street lined with wooden buildings stretched before her: a general store, a hotel, a saloon, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office. Horses were hitched outside several establishments, and a water trough stood near the center of town. In the distance, she could make out scattered homesteads and the military buildings of the fort itself. "First time in Stockton?" asked the stagecoach driver as he handed down her bag. "Yes," Margaret replied, adjusting her bonnet against the setting sun. "Could you direct me to a respectable boarding house? Mrs. Holloway runs a clean place 3 buildings down," he said, pointing. "Tell her Joe sent you. She might even have work for a young lady if you're looking." Margaret thanked him and made her way down the dusty street, acutely aware of curious glances from townsfolk. In Philadelphia, she had been just another society daughter. Here, a well-dressed woman traveling alone was clearly a novelty. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a small porch and neatly curtained windows. Margaret knocked on the front door, smoothing her travel-worn dress as best she could. The door swung open to reveal a stout woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Sharp eyes assessed Margaret from head to toe. "I don't recall expecting any guests today," the woman said. "No, madam," Margaret replied. "Joe, the stagecoach driver, suggested I inquire about a room. I've just arrived from back east." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. "Well, I do have one room available. $2 a week, meals included. I run a respectable house, no gentlemen callers in the rooms, and I lock the doors at 9 each night." "That sounds perfect," Margaret said, relief washing over her. "And I was wondering if you might know of any employment opportunities. I can sew, read, and write. I've managed household accounts as well." "Can you cook?" Mrs. Holloway asked. "Some basics," Margaret admitted, "though I'm a quick learner." Mrs. Holloway considered this. "The school teacher's been looking for an assistant. With summer coming, she'll have fewer students, but come fall, she'll be overwhelmed. And the general store sometimes needs help with inventory. Not many options for a lady in Fort Stockton, I'm afraid." "I appreciate any suggestions," Margaret said gratefully. That evening, after a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee shared with Mrs. Holloway's 3 other boarders, an elderly widow, a young seamstress, and a clerk from the general store, Margaret retreated to her small room. The space was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a single chair by the window. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the tiny wardrobe and placing her mother's locket on the nightstand. Sitting on the edge of the bed, the full weight of what she'd done finally settled on her shoulders. She was alone in a strange town with limited funds and no guarantee of work or security. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she been foolish to flee? To abandon the life of comfort she'd known for this uncertain existence? Then she remembered Howard Blackwood's cold eyes as he'd looked her over at their last meeting, assessing her like livestock. She recalled her father's dismissive wave when she'd expressed her concerns about the marriage. No, she had made the right choice. Whatever hardships awaited her in Fort Stockton, at least they would be hardships of her own choosing. The next morning, Margaret rose early, dressed in her simplest day dress, and set out to inquire about employment. The schoolhouse was her first stop, a small, whitewashed building at the edge of town. The teacher, Miss Adams, was apologetic but firm. "I would love assistance, Miss Mansfield, but the town council hasn't approved funds for a second teacher. Perhaps in the fall if enrollment increases." The general store yielded similar results. "Just hired a boy last week," the proprietor explained, "but I'll keep you in mind should we need additional help." By midday, Margaret had visited every establishment that might possibly employ a woman of her background with no success. Disheartened, she stood in the middle of the dusty street, considering her options. Her savings wouldn't last forever. She needed to secure some form of income soon. The sound of breaking glass and shouting drew her attention to the saloon. 2 men stumbled out onto the boardwalk, fists flying as a small crowd gathered to watch. Margaret stepped back, alarmed by the display of violence, and nearly collided with a tall figure behind her. "Careful there, madam," a deep voice said, steady hands grasping her shoulders to prevent her fall. Margaret turned to find herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man perhaps a few years older than herself, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly under the brim of his worn cowboy hat. He was dressed in the practical attire of a rancher denim pants, a faded shirt with rolled sleeves revealing tanned, muscular forearms, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "Thank you," she managed, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after a morning of walking in the dusty streets. "I was startled by the commotion. Saturday afternoon entertainment," he replied with a slight smile, releasing her shoulders, "though it usually doesn't start until after 3. His gaze was direct but not impolite. "You're new to town. Just arrived yesterday on the stage, I believe." Margaret nodded, surprised. "News travels quickly here." "Small town," he explained. "I'm Cole Sutton. I own the Double S Ranch about 10 miles northeast of here." "Margaret Mansfield," she replied, offering her gloved hand as propriety dictated. He took it briefly, his large hand engulfing hers. "What brings you to Fort Stockton, Miss Mansfield? Not many Eastern ladies find their way to this part of Texas without good reason." Something in his tone, curiosity without judgment, made Margaret consider honesty. "I'm seeking a fresh start, Mr. Sutton." "And employment, though that's proving more difficult than anticipated." Cole Sutton studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What kind of work were you hoping to find? Anything respectable," Margaret replied. "I can sew, keep accounts, teach reading and writing." "I'm willing to learn whatever skills might be needed," he nodded slowly. "As it happens, I'm in need of someone with exactly those abilities. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, manages the household, but I've been wanting to organize the ranch accounts properly, and I've got a sister arriving from Austin next month who could use some companionship." Margaret's pulse quickened with hope. "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Sutton?" "I'm suggesting we discuss the possibility," he replied carefully. "The ranch is remote, the work is demanding, and you'd have to be comfortable around horses and cattle. But you'd have your own quarters, meals provided, and fair wages." It was both terrifying and exhilarating to consider. A ranch, miles from town, working for a man she'd just met. Yet something about Cole Sutton's straightforward manner inspired trust. "I'd like to hear more," she said finally. "I'm heading back to the ranch this afternoon after I finish my business in town," he said. "If you're serious about the position, meet me at the general store at 3 o'clock. We can discuss details on the way, and if you decide it's not suitable, I'll bring you back to town tomorrow." Margaret considered the offer. It was unconventional, potentially improper by Eastern standards, but practical given her situation. "Would there be other women at the ranch? Mrs. Rivera, you mentioned," Cole nodded. "Mrs. Rivera and her husband live in a cottage on the property. She's been with my family since I was a boy. And my foreman's wife helps with cooking when we have a full crew. You wouldn't be alone among men if that's your concern." That eased her mind somewhat. "Very well, Mr. Sutton. I'll meet you at 3. Back at the boarding house, Margaret explained the potential opportunity to Mrs. Holloway, who offered guarded approval. "Cole Sutton's got a good reputation," the older woman admitted. "Built that ranch from nearly nothing after his father died, pays his debts and treats his workers fair. Still, a young lady like yourself should be cautious." "I'll keep my room here for now," Margaret decided. "At least until I'm certain the position is suitable." At precisely 3 o'clock, Margaret arrived at the general store with her small valise. Cole Sutton was loading supplies into a wagon, exchanging good-natured banter with the store owner. He straightened when he saw her, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss Mansfield," he said, "you decided to consider my offer." "I'd like to learn more," she replied, maintaining a composed exterior despite her inner trepidation. He helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. With a flick of the reins, the horses set off down the main street and soon were leaving Fort Stockton behind. Margaret glanced back at the town, wondering if she was making another rash decision. Having second thoughts already. Cole asked, his voice gentle. "Prudent consideration isn't the same as doubt, Mr. Sutton," she replied. "I'd like to know more about what duties you'd expect from me." He smiled at that. "Fair enough. The ranch books need organizing. My father kept records, but they're scattered among various ledgers and notes. I need someone to create a proper accounting system. Additionally, I've been meaning to catalog my father's library and correspondence." "That sounds manageable," Margaret said. "My sister Clara is 18 and has been living with our aunt in Austin to attend a ladies' academy," he continued. "She's returning home next month. I thought you might also serve as a companion of sorts. She'll miss the society of other young ladies." As they traveled, the landscape opened up before them, vast stretches of scrubland dotted with mesquite trees and cacti. In the distance, rocky hills rose against the horizon. It was unlike anything Margaret had seen before, both desolate and beautiful. "It's different from what you're accustomed to, I imagine," Cole remarked, following her gaze. "Yes," Margaret admitted, "but there's a certain majesty to it." "That's a kind way of putting it," he chuckled. "Most Eastern folks call it barren wasteland." "I find it honest," she said thoughtfully. "There's no pretense here. The land is exactly what it appears to be." Cole gave her a curious look. "That's an unusual perspective for a city lady." They continued in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic creak of the wagon and the steady hoof beats of the horses the only sounds. The afternoon sun was warm but not unbearable, with a dry breeze offering occasional relief. "May I ask why you left the East?" Cole asked eventually. "You don't seem like someone running from the law, if you don't mind my saying." Margaret hesitated. "I was running from a different kind of sentence, I suppose. My father arranged a marriage for me to a business associate, a man 30 years my senior whom I scarcely knew." Cole's expression darkened. "And you had no say in the matter?" "None whatsoever," she replied. "The wedding date was set, the announcements prepared. My father considered it a business transaction, not a matter requiring my consent." "So you fled?" "Yes." "Perhaps it was cowardly." "No," Cole interrupted firmly. "It took courage to leave everything familiar behind rather than surrender your life to someone else's plans." Something in his tone made Margaret look at him more closely. There was conviction in his face, a certainty that surprised her. "My father tried the same with my sister," he explained, seeing her questioning look. "Arranged for her to marry the son of a cattle baron from San Antonio. I put a stop to it after our father died. Told Clara her choice matters here, it's her life to decide." The phrase resonated deeply within Margaret. Your choice matters here. How long had she waited to hear those words? As the wagon crested a gentle rise, the Double S Ranch came into view. A sprawling main house of white painted wood stood at the center, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings, a barn, bunkhouse, and smaller cottages were arranged nearby, and corrals held horses and cattle. In the distance, a windmill turned lazily, and a stream glinted in the late afternoon sun. "It's lovely," Margaret said, genuinely impressed. "It's home," Cole replied simply. "My grandfather built the original cabin, and my father expanded it. I added the north wing 3 years ago." As they approached, a woman emerged from one of the smaller cottages. She appeared to be in her 50s, with dark hair streaked with silver and a round, pleasant face. She raised a hand in greeting as the wagon drew closer. "That's Mrs. Rivera," Cole explained. "Best cook in Pecos County and the closest thing to a mother I've had since mine passed when I was 12. They pulled up to the main house, and Cole jumped down from the wagon. He extended a hand to help Margaret descend, which she accepted gratefully, her legs stiff from the journey. Mrs. Rivera approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "So this is the young lady you mentioned," she said, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage. Her warm brown eyes assessed Margaret kindly. "Margaret Mansfield, this is Alina Rivera," Cole introduced them. "Mrs. Rivera, Miss Mansfield may be joining us to help with the ranch accounts and keep Clara company when she returns. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Rivera," Margaret said sincerely. "Welcome to Double S," the woman replied. "Come inside, you must be tired and dusty from the journey. I'll show you to the guest room while Mr. Sutton tends to the horses." The interior of the ranch house surprised Margaret. While the exterior was rustic, the inside revealed comfortable furnishings, polished wooden floors with scattered rugs, and walls adorned with a mix of practical items and artwork. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, flanked by bookshelves filled with volumes. "Mr. Sutton's father loved books," Mrs. Rivera explained, noticing Margaret's interest. "And Mr. Cole has added many more. He reads every night before bed, says it helps him think better." She led Margaret up a staircase to a hallway with several doors. "This will be your room if you stay," Mrs. Rivera said, opening the second door on the right. The bedroom was spacious and airy, with a large window overlooking the ranch yard. A four-poster bed with a quilt in shades of blue and cream stood against one wall, while a dresser, washstand, and writing desk completed the furnishings. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, genuinely impressed by the unexpected comfort. "The bathroom is down the hall," Mrs. Rivera continued. "We have running water. Mr. Cole installed the pipes himself last year. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Take your time to freshen up." Left alone, Margaret set her valise on the bed and moved to the window. From this vantage point, she could see the various activities of the ranch cowboys leading horses to the corral, others moving between buildings with purposeful strides. Cole had emerged from the barn and was speaking with an older man who gestured toward a group of cattle in a nearby pen. This life was utterly foreign to her. In Philadelphia, her days had been filled with social calls, charity committee meetings, and domestic arts deemed suitable for a lady of her standing. Here, life revolved around practical needs and the rhythm of the land. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a fresh dress, Margaret made her way downstairs. She found Cole in what appeared to be a study, sorting through a stack of papers at a large oak desk. He looked up as she entered and rose to his feet. "Miss Mansfield, I hope the accommodations are satisfactory." "More than satisfactory," she assured him. "Your home is lovely," he gestured to the cluttered desk. "This is what I meant about the accounts. My father had his own system, but since his passing 3 years ago, I've been focused on expanding the ranch. The paperwork has suffered." Margaret approached and examined the scattered ledgers and invoices. "It's not as chaotic as you suggested. With a proper filing system and consistent record keeping, this could be organized within a week or two." Cole looked impressed. "You have experience with such matters." "My mother died when I was 17, Margaret explained. "My father relied on me to manage the household accounts afterward." A flash of understanding crossed Cole's face. "We have that in common, then stepping into responsibilities after losing a parent." "Yes," Margaret agreed softly. "Though I suspect running a cattle ranch is somewhat more demanding than ordering groceries and paying the staff." That earned a genuine laugh from Cole. Different challenges, but both require attention to detail. He grew more serious. About the position, I can offer $25 a month, plus room and board. You'd have Sundays free, and I could arrange transportation to town when needed. The offer was generous, more than she might have earned as a schoolteacher or shop clerk. Before I accept, Margaret said carefully, I should be honest with you. My father and the man I was to marry may be searching for me. I don't think they'd look this far west, but I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your home. Cole's expression remained steady. Miss Mansfield, trouble finds its way to every ranch sooner or later. I appreciate your candor, but I'm not concerned. Texas has a long tradition of offering fresh starts to those who seek them. The dinner bell rang, interrupting their conversation. Why don't you join us for supper? Cole suggested. You can give me your decision afterward. The dining room continued the theme of rustic comfort, with a long table that could seat at least 12 people. Tonight, only 4 places were set for Cole, Margaret, Mrs. Rivera, and a man Margaret assumed was Mr. Rivera. My foreman and the ranch hands eat at the bunkhouse, Cole explained as they took their seats. Unless it's a special occasion, it's usually just us and the Riveras for dinner. Mr. Rivera proved to be a quiet, dignified man who had managed the double Estiquez horses for over 20 years. The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh biscuits, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with Cole asking thoughtful questions about Margaret's skills and interests without prying into the specifics of her departure from Philadelphia. After dinner, Cole invited Margaret to step out onto the porch. The Texas night had descended, bringing a cooling breeze and a sky ablaze with more stars than Margaret had ever seen. It's magnificent, she breathed, gazing upward. One of the benefits of being far from city lights, Cole said, leaning against the porch railing beside her. Have you made a decision about the position? Margaret turned to face him. In the soft lantern light from the windows, his features were shadowed, but his blue eyes remained clear and direct. I'd like to accept, she said. On a trial basis, perhaps, a month to determine if the arrangement suits us both. Cole nodded. That seems fair. When would you like to begin? I should return to town tomorrow to settle my account with Mrs. Holloway and collect the rest of my belongings, Margaret replied. After that, I could start immediately. Good, Cole said, offering his hand to seal their agreement. As Margaret placed her hand in his, she felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas climate. Welcome to the Double S, Miss Mansfield. The next morning, true to his word, Cole drove Margaret back to Fort Stockton. She gathered her few remaining possessions from Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, paid her bill, and promised to visit when she came to town. You be careful out there, Mrs. Holloway advised. Mr. Sutton seems decent enough, but you're still a young woman alone in a strange place. I'll be fine, Margaret assured her, touched by the older woman's concern. The Riveras will be there, and Mr. Sutton's sister arrives next month. By midday, they were on the road back to the ranch. As the wagon rolled away from Fort Stockton, Margaret felt a curious mix of nervousness and anticipation. She was embarking on yet another new chapter, but this one felt more like a beginning than an escape. The following days established a routine. Each morning after breakfast, Margaret would work in Cole's study, organizing invoices, updating ledgers, and creating a filing system for ranch correspondence. The afternoons were often spent cataloging the extensive library or assisting Mrs. Rivera with household tasks. Cole himself was frequently out on the ranch, overseeing cattle, checking fence lines, or meeting with neighboring ranchers. But he made a point to check on Margaret's progress each evening, often spending an hour discussing the ranch operations and explaining aspects of the cattle business that affected the accounting. During these conversations, Margaret began to appreciate the complexity of running such an enterprise. The Double S ran over 3,000 head of cattle on nearly 10,000 acres, employed 15 full-time cowboys, and maintained business relationships with buyers as far away as Chicago and Kansas City. "Your father built quite an operation," she remarked one evening as they reviewed the spring cattle sale figures. "He had vision," Cole agreed. "Saw the potential in this land when others dismissed it as worthless." "Like you," Margaret observed. "Mrs. Rivera mentioned you've expanded the ranch significantly since taking over." A hint of color touched Cole's tanned cheeks. "I've been fortunate. Made some good decisions, had some lucky breaks." "Don't diminish your accomplishments," Margaret said. "The ledgers tell the story clearly enough. You've nearly doubled the ranch's productivity in 3 years. Cole studied her with that direct gaze that still sometimes made her heart beat a little faster. "You're observant, Miss Mansfield." "It's Margaret, please," she said impulsively. After 2 weeks of working closely together, the formality seemed unnecessary. "At least when it's just us discussing business." A slow smile spread across his face. "Margaret, then, and I'm Cole." As May gave way to June, Margaret found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to identify the different ranch hands by name, discovered she enjoyed the quiet rhythm of evenings on the porch watching the sunset, and even attempted to help Mrs. Rivera in the kitchen, though her culinary skills remained limited. One afternoon, while organizing Cole's father's correspondence, Margaret came across a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to Jonathan Sutton from Elizabeth Sutton, Cole's mother. She was carefully returning them to the drawer when Cole entered the study. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I found these while sorting. I didn't read them." Cole approached and took the bundle, his expression softening as he recognized the handwriting. "My mother's letters to my father while she was back east visiting family, the last ones before she fell ill." "I'll leave these for you to sort through personally," Margaret said gently. Cole sat at the desk, turning the bundle in his hands. "She was remarkable, educated, refined, but strong enough to embrace this hard country when she married my father. Clara resembles her, both in looks and spirit." "You must miss her," Margaret said quietly. "Every day," Cole admitted. "But it's been 15 years. The sharp pain fades, leaving the good memories stronger than the loss." There was something in his quiet acceptance that touched Margaret deeply. Despite his youth, Cole possessed a maturity and wisdom that many older men lacked. It made her think of Howard Blackwood, with his cold calculations and entitled manner. The contrast could not have been more stark. The next morning dawned with unusual coolness for June in Texas. After breakfast, Cole appeared in the study doorway, dressed in his riding clothes. "The day's too fine to spend indoors," he declared. "How would you like a proper tour of the ranch?" Margaret hesitated. "On horseback." "Don't tell me a Philadelphia lady doesn't ride," Cole teased. "I rode in the park occasionally," Margaret admitted, "but never Western style." "We have a gentle mare that would suit you," he assured her, "and we can take it slow." The prospect was both intimidating and exciting. "I'd need to change my dress." "Meet me at the stables in 30 minutes, Cole said with a grin. Margaret hurried upstairs to change into her simplest skirt and blouse. Mrs. Rivera intercepted her with a broad-brimmed straw hat. "For the sun," she explained with a knowing smile. Mr. Cole doesn't often offer personal tours of the ranch. At the stables, Cole was waiting with 2 saddled horses, his own chestnut gelding and a dappled gray mare with gentle eyes. "This is Pepper," Cole said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's steady and patient, perfect for a city girl." I'm not entirely helpless, Margaret protested, but accepted his assistance mounting the horse. The western saddle felt strange compared to the side saddle she was accustomed to, but she adapted quickly. They set off at a leisurely pace, Cole pointing out landmarks and explaining the operation of the ranch. They rode past grazing cattle, visited the spring that provided water for the eastern pastures, and climbed a gentle rise that offered a panoramic view of the entire property. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, taking in the sweeping vistas. "I understand why you love it so much." "My father used to bring me to this spot when I was a boy," Cole said, dismounting and helping Margaret down from her horse. Said a man needed to see his whole world sometimes to understand his place in it. They settled on a flat boulder, the horses grazing nearby. Cole pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, and apples packed by Mrs. Rivera. "I thought we might have lunch before heading back," he explained. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the vastness of the Texas landscape spread before them. The sky stretched endlessly blue, broken only by a few wispy clouds. "May I ask you something personal?" Cole said finally. Margaret nodded, curious. "The man your father wanted you to marry, what was he like?" The question caught her off guard. "Howard Blackwood," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. "He owns textile mills in Philadelphia and New York. My father's company supplies the raw cotton for his operations." "But what kind of man is he?" Cole pressed. Margaret considered the question seriously. "Cold, calculating. He's been widowed twice with grown children from his first marriage. He spoke of me as an investment, young enough to bear more children, educated enough to manage his household, and connected enough to benefit his social standing." "And you never considered accepting the match?" "I might have once," she admitted. "Before my mother died, I believed in my father's judgment. I was raised to think marriage was primarily a social and economic arrangement, with love being a pleasant but unnecessary addition." "What changed?" Margaret touched the locket at her throat. "In her final days, my mother confessed that her greatest regret was not marrying for love. She urged me to seek a different path, never settle for a life without passion, she told me." Cole's gaze lingered on her face. "Wise advice. What about you?" Margaret asked, turning the conversation. "No wife waiting in the wings for the successful rancher." A shadow crossed his face. "There was someone once, Rebecca Porter, daughter of a rancher near Austin. We courted for nearly a year." "What happened?" "Her father lost his land in a bad drought 3 years ago. They moved to California for a fresh start. She chose to go with her family rather than stay with me." His tone held no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. "I couldn't blame her. Family loyalty runs deep. You didn't consider following her." Cole gestured to the land around them. "This is my heritage, my responsibility. I couldn't abandon it, even for her." They lapsed into silence, each contemplating the choices that had shaped their lives. After a while, Cole stood and offered his hand to help Margaret up. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding that transcended their different backgrounds. The moment broke when Pepper whinnied softly, drawing Cole's attention. "We should head back," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Storm clouds building to the west. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in private thoughts. As they approached the stables, the ranch foreman rode out to meet them, his expression urgent. "Mr. Sutton." Telegraph came from Austin. "Miss Clara's arriving on tomorrow's stage, not next week." Cole's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Tomorrow? What happened?" Message didn't say, just that she's coming early. "We'll need to prepare her room," Cole said, dismounting swiftly. "And send someone to meet the stage." Margaret slid down from her horse. wincing slightly at the unfamiliar soreness in her legs. "I'll help Mrs. Rivera get everything ready." Cole turned to her, genuine appreciation in his eyes. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm sorry our ride was cut short." "There will be other days," she replied with a smile. The arrival of Clara Sutton the next day brought a whirlwind of energy to the Double S. Where Cole was steady and reserved, his sister was vibrant and outspoken. At 18, she possessed the same striking blue eyes as her brother, but her hair was a lighter shade of blonde, and her slender frame practically hummed with restless energy. "You must be Miss Mansfield," she exclaimed upon being introduced. Cole's letters mentioned he'd hired a Philadelphia lady to organize his dreadful paperwork. Thank goodness I was dreading having to help him with those dusty ledgers all summer. Margaret found herself immediately charmed by Clara's enthusiasm. "Please call me Margaret. And I'm looking forward to having another woman near my age at the ranch." "Oh, we'll be great friends," Clara declared confidently. "I have so many stories from Austin to share, and you must tell me all about Philadelphia society. Is it true ladies there change clothes 4 times a day?" "Only on particularly busy social days," Margaret laughed. Clara's early arrival, it transpired, was due to an incident at her aunt's home in Austin. "Aunt Harriet wanted me to attend a dinner party where I'd be seated next to Gerald Whitcomb," she explained to Margaret later that evening as they sat in Clara's room. "When I refused, she threatened to write to Cole about my rebellious nature." "Who is Gerald Whitcomb?" Margaret asked. "The most insufferable, pompous bore in all of Texas," Clara declared dramatically. "Son of Aunt Harriet's dearest friend and heir to some banking fortune. She's been trying to throw us together for months." Margaret smiled, recognizing kindred spirit. "So you fled an unwanted match as well." Clara's eyes widened. "As well? Do tell." Margaret found herself sharing the story of her escape from Philadelphia and the arranged marriage to Howard Blackwood. Clara proved to be an excellent listener, gasping and commenting at all the right moments. "How absolutely romantic," she sighed when Margaret finished. "Fleeing across the country to escape a loveless marriage, only to find yourself here at the Double S." "There's nothing romantic about it," Margaret protested. "I simply made a practical decision to preserve my independence." Clara gave her a knowing look. "And my brother's offer of employment was purely practical as well." "Of course," Margaret insisted, though she felt a flush creeping up her neck. "Your brother needed assistance with his accounts and I needed a position." Clara hummed skeptically. "That's why he's been smiling more in the past 3 weeks than in the entire year before, according to Mrs. Rivera." "Clara," Margaret exclaimed, both embarrassed and secretly pleased. "Oh, don't worry," Clara said, patting Margaret's hand. "I approve entirely. Cole needs someone who challenges him. Most local girls are either intimidated by him or only interested in his property." "There's nothing between us," Margaret insisted. "We have a professional arrangement." "For now," Clara replied with a mischievous smile. "But I've always had excellent intuition about these things." With Clara's arrival, life at the Double S took on a more sociable rhythm. The young woman organized picnics, convinced Cole to host a small dance for neighboring ranchers, and insisted on regular rides to town for supplies and gossip. Margaret found herself drawn into these activities, gradually shedding some of the reserve she'd maintained since arriving in Texas. Cole, too, seemed more relaxed with his sister's presence. He laughed more readily, occasionally joined in their evening card games, and even demonstrated surprising skill at the piano in the ranch house parlor. "Our mother insisted we both learn," he explained when Margaret expressed surprise at his musical ability. "Said civilization required more than cattle and horses." June melted into July, bringing intense heat that shimmered above the Texas landscape. Work continued on the ranch. Cattle were moved to fresher pastures, repairs made to buildings and fences, and preparations begun for the fall roundup. Margaret completed the organization of the ranch accounts, creating a system that Cole praised for its clarity and efficiency. "I've never seen the finances laid out so logically," he told her one evening as they reviewed the monthly statements. "What would you like me to focus on next?" she asked. "I've finished cataloging the library as well." Cole hesitated. "Actually, I've been meaning to discuss your position. The work you were hired for is largely complete." A cold weight settled in Margaret's stomach. "Are you suggesting my services are no longer required?" "Not at all," Cole said quickly. "I value your contributions enormously. I was thinking more about adjusting your role. The ranch is growing. We've acquired new grazing land to the north, and I'm considering expanding into breeding specialty stock. I could use a permanent business manager, someone to handle correspondence with buyers, track expenses, and manage the books on an ongoing basis." Relief washed through Margaret. "That sounds like interesting work." "It would mean a permanent position here," Cole continued, his eyes intent on her face. "If that appeals to you." "It does," Margaret admitted. "I've grown fond of the double S." Something in Cole's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear it. The ranch has been brighter since your arrival." Before Margaret could respond to this unexpectedly personal comment, shouts erupted from the direction of the bunkhouse. Cole was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Fire!" came a distant cry. Orange flames were visible at the edge of the hay storage barn. Cole bolted for the door. "Stay here," he called over his shoulder. Margaret ignored the instruction, following him onto the porch. Ranch hands were already running toward the flames, carrying buckets and blankets. The night air, still hot from the day's sun, carried the acrid smell of burning hay. For the next 2 hours, Margaret worked alongside everyone on the ranch, filling buckets from the well, passing them along a human chain, and helping Mrs. Rivera tend to minor burns and smoke inhalation. Cole was everywhere, directing the firefighting efforts, rescuing equipment from the burning structure, and ensuring none of his men took unnecessary risks. By midnight, the fire was contained, though the hay barn was a total loss. Exhausted ranch hands slumped on the ground, faces blackened with soot, drinking water that Margaret and Clara distributed. Cole approached, his shirt torn and smudged with ash, a small cut bleeding on his forehead. Without thinking, Margaret pulled her handkerchief from her pocket and reached up to dab at the wound. "You're hurt," she said softly. "It's nothing," he replied, but didn't pull away from her touch. His eyes, bright blue even through the grime on his face, held hers. "You were supposed to stay in the house. Did you really expect me to sit safely inside while everyone else worked?" she asked, continuing to clean his cut gently. A tired smile crossed his face. "No, that wouldn't be like you at all." His words warmed her more than they should have. Standing there in the flickering light of the dying fire, Margaret felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of mutual respect that ran deeper than employer and employee. "We saved the main structure, and no one was seriously hurt," Cole said, addressing the gathered ranch hands. "Good work, all of you. We'll rebuild better than before." Later, as dawn approached and the crisis fully passed, Margaret found herself alone with Cole on the porch of the main house. Everyone else had finally gone to bed, exhaustion overcoming even the most energetic among them. "How did it start?" Margaret asked quietly. "Lightning strike, most likely," Cole replied, his voice weary. "There was that storm to the south earlier. Must have hit without anyone noticing at first." "I'm sorry about the loss," Cole shrugged. "Buildings can be replaced, people can't." He glanced sideways at her. You impressed everyone tonight. Not many city ladies would wade into a firefight like that. I'm not many ladies, Margaret replied with a small smile. No, Cole agreed softly. You're certainly not. The fire marked a turning point at the Double S. As they worked together to rebuild the hay barn, Margaret found herself fully integrated into ranch operations. No longer just the Eastern lady who kept the books, she was now consulted on decisions, included in planning discussions, and treated as an essential part of the ranch community. July brought scorching temperatures that made outdoor work brutal. The ranch hands started their days before dawn and took shelter during the hottest midday hours. Even inside the thick-walled ranch house, the heat was oppressive. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Clara suggested an excursion to the swimming hole on the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. It's completely private, she assured Margaret. Cole forbids the hands from going there when we're swimming. We'll bring Mrs. Rivera as chaperone if it makes you more comfortable. Margaret hesitated. Swimming in Philadelphia had involved proper bathing costumes and segregated beach areas. The idea of a creek swimming hole seemed both alarming and tempting in the relentless heat. I don't have appropriate attire, she demurred. Nonsense, Clara declared. You can borrow one of my old dresses. No one will see us except Mrs. Rivera, and she's been watching me swim since I was in pigtails. Eventually, Margaret agreed. The three women rowed to the swimming hole, a deep, clear pool formed where the creek widened and slowed around a bend. Ancient cottonwood trees provided dappled shade, and large rocks created natural platforms for sitting or diving. Mrs. Rivera settled herself on a blanket with some mending, pointedly turning her back as Clara and Margaret changed into the old cotton dresses designated for swimming. It's wonderful, Clara called, already splashing in the water. Come in, Margaret. Taking a deep breath, Margaret waded into the creek. The water was cool against her skin, a blessed relief from the Texas heat. She moved deeper until the water reached her waist, then shoulders. I haven't gone swimming since I was a child, she admitted, letting herself float on her back. Criminal neglect, Clara declared. Swimming is God's perfect remedy for summer heat. They spent a glorious hour in the water, emerging finally when Mrs. Rivera called that it was time to return for dinner. As they dressed in their regular clothes behind separate boulders, Clara asked casually, Have you noticed Cole watching you lately? Margaret nearly dropped her hairpins. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. At dinner, when you're working in the study, even during the barn raising his eyes follow you, Clara persisted. And you watch him too when you think no one's looking. That's absurd, Margaret protested, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. Had she been so transparent? It's not absurd at all, Clara replied matter-of-factly. You're beautiful, intelligent, and capable, exactly the kind of woman Cole needs. And he's quite a catch himself, if you don't mind my saying so about my own brother. Clara, please, Margaret said, emerging from behind her rock fully dressed but still flushed. Your brother employed me when I desperately needed work. I'm grateful to him, of course, but you feel more than gratitude, Clara finished for her. Just as he feels more than appreciation for your bookkeeping skills. Before Margaret could formulate a response, Mrs. Rivera called that they really must be going. The conversation ended, but Clara's words echoed in Margaret's mind throughout the ride back to the ranch. Was it possible Cole Sutton had developed feelings for her? More importantly, could she acknowledge the truth of her own emotions? Somewhere between organizing ledgers and fighting fires, between morning coffee on the porch and evening discussions of books they'd both read, Margaret had fallen in love with the quiet, principled rancher. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had fled Philadelphia to escape one man's claim on her life, only to find her heart voluntarily surrendering to another. But this was different. Cole had never presumed ownership of her choices. From their first meeting, he had emphasized that her decisions mattered. That evening at dinner, Margaret found herself unusually aware of Cole's presence at the head of the table. Their eyes met briefly as he passed her the bread, and the slight smile he offered sent warmth blooming through her chest. After dinner, Cole invited everyone to the porch to catch the evening breeze. Clara produced a deck of cards and initiated a lively game of whist, with herself and Mr. Rivera playing against Mrs. Rivera and Margaret. Cole declined to play, instead settling in a rocking chair with a book, though Margaret noticed he seemed more interested in watching their game than reading. When the Riveras retired for the night and Clara declared herself exhausted, Margaret found herself alone with Cole on the porch. The night was still warm but tolerable, with a slight breeze rustling the leaves of the oak tree in the yard. Stars blanketed the sky in numbers that still amazed her eastern eyes. "I received a letter from a cattle buyer in Chicago today," Cole said after a comfortable silence. "He was impressed by your detailed accounting of the spring herd quality and health records." Margaret smiled. "I simply organized the information your foreman provided." "You did more than that," Cole insisted. "You presented it in a way that emphasized our strengths. The buyer is offering premium prices because you convinced him our stock is superior." "Well, it is superior," Margaret pointed out. "I merely stated facts." Cole chuckled. "Your mere facts just earned the ranch an additional $200 per head." "I'm glad to have helped," Margaret said sincerely. Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken thoughts. "Margaret," Cole began finally, his voice lower. He was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch house, unusual for this late hour. Cole was instantly alert, rising to his feet as a rider came into view in the moonlight. "Stay here," he said, moving to the porch steps. The rider pulled up in front of the house, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Mr. Sutton," he called. "That's me," Cole replied cautiously. "What brings you here so late?" "Telegraph for Miss Margaret Mansfield," the man said, dismounting. "Station master in town said it was urgent, paid me $5 to deliver it tonight instead of waiting till morning." Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. No one knew she was here except her father, Howard Blackwood. Somehow they had found her. With trembling fingers, she accepted the yellow telegram paper from the messenger. Cole paid the man and offered him water for himself and his horse before returning to Margaret's side. "Bad news?" he asked quietly, noticing her expression. Margaret stared at the telegram, her mind racing. "It's from my friend Ann in Philadelphia. My father suffered a stroke 3 weeks ago. He's asking for me." Cole's face softened with compassion. "I'm sorry, Margaret. Will you go to him?" The question hung in the warm night air. Despite everything, William Mansfield was still her father. The man who had read her bedtime stories when she was small, who had proudly displayed her watercolors in his study, who had grieved alongside her when her mother died. "I should," she whispered. "Despite our differences, he's still my father." Cole nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'll arrange for transportation to catch tomorrow's eastbound train." "Thank you," Margaret said, suddenly overwhelmed by what this meant. Leaving the double S, leaving Cole. "You should pack and get some rest," he said gently. "It's a long journey back east." Margaret nodded numbly and moved toward the door, but paused with her hand on the frame. "Cole," she said softly, turning back. "What were you going to say earlier, before the messenger arrived?" For a long moment he simply looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. Then he shook his head slightly. "It can wait. Your father needs you now." The next morning was a flurry of activity. Clara tearfully helped Margaret pack her belongings. Mrs. Rivera prepared food for the journey, and Cole arranged for the ranch wagon to take Margaret to Fort Stockton in time for the afternoon stage. "You will write, won't you?" Clara asked, embracing Margaret tightly. "And come back to visit when you can." "Of course," Margaret promised, though she wondered if returning would be wise. How could she visit as merely a friend when her heart would be yearning for so much more? Mrs. Rivera pressed a small package into her hands. "Spice cake for the journey," she explained. "And a letter with my recipe for biscuits. You said you wanted to learn." "Thank you for everything," Margaret said, hugging the older woman. "You made me feel at home here." Finally, it was time to depart. Cole himself would drive her to town, a fact that both comforted and distressed Margaret. 2 hours alone with him would be precious but painful. The first part of the journey passed in near silence, both of them seemingly lost in thought as the wagon rolled across the familiar landscape. Margaret tried to memorize every detail, the way the morning sun cast long shadows from the mesquite trees, the distant outline of the hills they'd visited on horseback, the vastness of the Texas sky that had become a comfort rather than an intimidation. "Will you return to Philadelphia permanently?" Cole asked finally, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I don't know," Margaret admitted. "It depends on my father's condition and other factors." "Howard Blackwood," Cole said, the name flat on his tongue. "Yes," Margaret acknowledged. "My absence may have ended the engagement arrangement, but if my father is seriously ill, Blackwood might see an opportunity to press his suit again." Cole's hands tightened on the reins. "And would you accept?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "That hasn't changed. My father's illness doesn't give him or anyone else the right to determine my future." Relief flickered across Cole's face before his expression turned serious again. "Margaret, there's something I need to say before you leave." Her heart began to race. "Yes." Cole drew the wagon to a halt in the shade of a large oak tree, turning to face her fully. "These past months, having you at the Double S, it's changed things, changed me." "How so?" Margaret asked softly, hardly daring to breathe. "After Rebecca left, I convinced myself that the ranch was enough, that I didn't need more in my life than cattle and land and family duty," he said, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Then you arrived, and suddenly the ranch felt different, brighter, more like a home than just a place of work." Margaret's throat tightened with emotion. "Cole, I'm not asking you to stay," he continued quickly. "Your father needs you and you need to go, I understand that. But I want you to know that whatever you decide about your future, there's a place for you at the Double S. Not as an employee, but as—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "As what?" Margaret whispered. "As my partner," Cole said simply. "My equal, my wife if you wanted that, or simply as yourself in whatever capacity you choose. Your choice matters here, Margaret, it always will." The words she'd longed to hear, spoken with such sincerity, broke through the last of Margaret's reserves. Tears filled her eyes. "I've fallen in love with you," she admitted. "With your kindness, your integrity, your devotion to your land and the people who depend on you. I never expected to find someone like you when I fled Philadelphia." Cole reached out to take her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I love you too, Margaret Mansfield. Enough to wait if that's what you need. Go to your father, settle what must be settled. Know that I'll be here when you're ready to return." "You'd wait, even if it takes months, even if it takes years," he promised, "though I hope it won't be quite that long." Margaret laughed through her tears, squeezing his hand. "It won't be. Whatever happens in Philadelphia, my heart belongs here now." Cole leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her a gentle, tender kiss that promised both passion and respect. Margaret's free hand moved to his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of his morning stubble beneath her fingers. When they parted, Cole pressed his forehead against hers. "Come back to me," he whispered. "I will," Margaret promised. The remainder of the journey to Fort Stockton was filled with conversation, plans, hopes, and practical matters about Margaret's return. When they reached the stage stop, Cole purchased her ticket all the way to Philadelphia and pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. "For emergencies," he explained when she tried to refuse the money. "I'd feel better knowing you have resources of your own." Margaret accepted the gift, understanding it for what it was: not charity, but an act of partnership and care. As the eastbound stage prepared to depart, Cole helped Margaret aboard. "Telegraph when you arrive safely," he said, "and whenever you can after that." "I will," she promised, reluctant to let go of his hand. "Take care of Clara and the Riveras, and yourself." "I'm counting the days until you return," he said quietly. The stage driver called for final boarding. With one last squeeze of Cole's hand, Margaret settled into her seat. As the coach pulled away, she watched through the window as Cole's figure grew smaller in the distance, his tall form standing straight as a pine in the dusty street of Fort Stockton. The journey east was long and tiring, but Margaret's mind was too full of thoughts and plans to notice the discomfort much. By the time she arrived in Philadelphia, 8 days later, she had formulated a clear strategy for dealing with both her father and Howard Blackwood. The Mansfield home on Rittenhouse Square looked exactly as she had left it 3 months earlier. Margaret paid the cab driver and climbed the familiar steps, taking a deep breath before lifting the brass knocker. The door swung open to reveal Johnson, the family butler, whose normally impassive face registered genuine shock. "Miss Margaret, we had no idea that your father will be most—" "Hello, Johnson," Margaret said warmly. "Is my father receiving visitors today?" "Yes, miss. He's in the solarium. His condition has improved considerably this past week." Margaret made her way through the house, noting how nothing had changed in her absence. The same paintings hung on the walls, the same vases held fresh flowers, the same clock ticked in the hallway. Yet she felt like a different person moving through a museum of her former life. The solarium at the back of the house was bright with afternoon sunlight. Seated in a wheelchair beside the windows was William Mansfield, a blanket across his knees despite the summer warmth. His once robust frame had diminished, and his left hand lay curled and motionless in his lap. But his eyes, when they found her, were clear and alert. "Margaret," he said, his voice weaker than she remembered but still carrying the authoritative tone she knew so well. "Hello, Father," she replied, moving to stand before him. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the headstrong daughter who had defied convention and the proud father who had tried to control her future. "You came back," he said finally. "Anne's telegram said you were asking for me." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "I sent no telegram." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. "What?" "I've been ill, yes," her father acknowledged, gesturing to his weakened state. "But I never sent for you, though I am not displeased to see you." Before Margaret could process this information, the solarium door opened behind her. She turned to find Howard Blackwood standing in the doorway, his tall figure impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his gray hair and beard neatly trimmed. His cold eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, before his thin lips curved into what might generously be called a smile. "Margaret," he said, advancing into the room, "how fortunate. I was just telling your father this morning that my investigators had narrowed your location to Texas. And now you've saved us the trouble of retrieving you." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Retrieving me? I'm not a lost piece of property, Mr. Blackwood." "Of course not, my dear," Blackwood replied smoothly. "But a young woman of your station traveling unchaperoned, it simply isn't done. Now that you've had your little adventure, we can proceed with our wedding plans. I've been most patient." Margaret turned to her father. "Is this true? After I made my feelings so clear, you still intend to force this marriage?" William Mansfield looked uncomfortable. "Margaret, be reasonable. Howard has been exceptionally understanding about your impetuous behavior. The merger agreement still stands, contingent upon this union." "I see," Margaret said coldly. "My absence taught you nothing." "On the contrary," her father replied, a hint of his old steel returning. "It taught me that you need a firmer hand than mine. Howard is prepared to provide that guidance." Blackwood stepped closer, his cologne too strong, too artificial after months of Texas air nearly making Margaret gag. "I've secured a special license," he said. "We can be married this Sunday." "A small ceremony given the circumstances." "No," Margaret said firmly. "I beg your pardon," Blackwood's tone sharpened. "I said no," Margaret repeated, straightening her spine. "I will not marry you, Mr. Blackwood, not Sunday, not ever." Her father leaned forward in his wheelchair. "Margaret, you are being childish. Howard offers you security, position, and the continuation of your accustomed lifestyle." "I've lived without those things for months now," Margaret replied. "I've earned my own way, made my own choices, and found my own happiness. I won't surrender that, not for a business merger, not for social expectation, and certainly not for a man who sees me as property to be retrieved." Blackwood's face darkened with anger. "William, control your daughter." "He can't," Margaret said before her father could respond. "I'm 22 years old. I have resources of my own now. I came because I believed my father was ill and asking for me, but I see now that was a deception." "A necessary one," Blackwood insisted. "Your behavior has been scandalous." Margaret laughed, a free, genuine sound that seemed to startle both men. "By whose standards? I've lived honestly, worked diligently, and earned respect. There's nothing scandalous in that." Her father studied her with newfound interest. "You've changed." "Yes," Margaret acknowledged. "For the better, I think." "Where have you been all this time?" he asked. Margaret hesitated, but decided truth was her strongest position. "Working on a cattle ranch in West Texas. Managing accounts, organizing correspondence, learning about the land and the people who make their lives there." Her father's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "A ranch, my daughter, doing what, cooking for cowboys, managing a business," Margaret corrected firmly. "One quite profitable, in fact, due in part to my contributions." Blackwood made a dismissive gesture. "Playing at commerce, perhaps. But that frontier existence is no life for a woman of your breeding." "That frontier existence has brought me more fulfillment than I ever found in Philadelphia society," Margaret replied. "And more importantly, it brought me to a man who respects my mind and my choices. A man I intend to marry of my own free will." The shock on both men's faces would have been comical under different circumstances. "You can't possibly be serious," her father sputtered. "Some rough cowhand, Cole Sutton," Margaret interrupted. "Owner of the Double S Ranch in Pecos County. A gentleman in every way that matters, though he might not recognize the latest fashion in waistcoats or know which fork to use for oysters." "This is absurd," Blackwood declared. "William, your daughter has clearly lost her senses during her adventures. Perhaps arrest a doctor. Henderson's sanitarium would be advisable before we proceed." Margaret took a step back, alarmed by the threat of institutionalization. "Touch me against my will, Mr. Blackwood, and I promise you'll regret it. I've learned more than bookkeeping in Texas." The steel in her voice must have registered because Blackwood hesitated. Margaret turned to her father, softening her tone slightly. "Father, I didn't come to fight. I came because I thought you needed me. I'm sorry for your illness, truly. But I won't be forced or coerced into a marriage I don't want." William Mansfield was silent for a long moment, studying his daughter with eyes that had always seemed to see every flaw, every shortcoming. But now, perhaps for the first time, he seemed to be seeing her the real Margaret, not the dutiful daughter he had assumed she would always be. "You really care for this rancher?" he asked finally. "I love him," Margaret said simply. "And he loves me not for my family name or what advantage I might bring him, but for myself." Her father nodded slowly, something like resignation crossing his face. "I see." "This is preposterous," Blackwood interjected. "William, the contracts can be renegotiated," William Mansfield said, surprising them both. "Margaret, I don't approve of your methods or this hasty attachment to a man I've never met, but your mother would." He paused, emotion briefly overcoming him. "Catherine would have been proud of your courage." Tears sprang to Margaret's eyes at the unexpected concession. "Father, go back to your cowboy if that's what you truly want," he continued. "But bring him east someday. I should at least meet the man who's stolen my daughter's heart." Howard Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. We had an agreement, Mansfield." "Between businessmen, yes," her father replied. "But I find I cannot sell my daughter's happiness, even for the most advantageous merger." He looked at Margaret again. "Perhaps I've been reminded what your mother would say about such arrangements." Blackwood stormed from the room, slamming the door behind him. In the sudden quiet, Margaret approached her father's wheelchair and knelt beside it. "Thank you," she said softly. Her father's good hand reached out to touch her cheek briefly. "I never stopped loving you, Margaret, even when I was angriest at your defiance." "I know," she replied. "Will you be all right? Your health?" "Dr. Phillips believes I'll recover much of my strength with time and exercise," he said. "The stroke was not as severe as it might have been." "I'll stay for a few days," Margaret offered, "to make sure you have proper care." Her father nodded. And then I'm going home," Margaret said with certainty. "To Texas, to Cole." 3 days later, after assuring herself that her father's household was running smoothly and his medical care was adequate, Margaret boarded a westbound train. In her reticule was a telegraph she'd received that morning. "All well at double S stop. Rain finally came. Stop every day without you longer than the last stop. Hurry home. Stop Cole." The return journey seemed to pass both more quickly and more slowly than her eastward trip had. Margaret alternated between impatience to arrive and nervous anticipation. What if Cole had changed his mind? What if the ranch had faced hardships in her absence? What if the special connection they'd shared had been diminished by distance and time? But beneath these fleeting doubts lay a bedrock of certainty. Cole Sutton was a man of his word. He had promised to wait, and he would, just as she had promised to return, and she was. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Fort Stockton on a brilliant August afternoon, Margaret scanned the street eagerly. Her heart sank slightly when she didn't immediately see Cole among those waiting at the stage stop. Then a movement caught her eye, a tall figure emerging from the telegraph office farther down the street. Cole spotted the stage at the same moment, quickening his pace. By the time Margaret descended from the coach, he was there, his blue eyes bright with joy and relief. "You came back," he said simply. "I promised I would," Margaret replied. For a breathless moment they stood facing each other, oblivious to the bustle of the stage stop around them. Then Cole closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms with a gentle urgency that spoke volumes. Margaret returned his embrace without hesitation, heedless of who might be watching. "I missed you," Cole murmured against her hair. "Every day." "I missed you too," Margaret whispered, "but I'm home now." Cole drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "Your father." "Is he recovering?" Margaret assured him. "And surprisingly supportive of my decision to return. He wants to meet you someday." A smile spread across Cole's face. "I'd like that, but not too soon. I've had to share you with the world long enough." They walked arm in arm to where Cole had tied his horses, not the wagon this time, but two saddle horses. "I hope you don't mind riding back," he said. "I was in town on business when your telegraph arrived saying you'd be on today's stage. Didn't have time to return for the wagon." "I don't mind at all," Margaret assured him, pleased that her months at the Double S had made horseback travel seem normal rather than daunting. "How are Clara and the Riveras?" "Eager to see you," Cole replied, helping her mount. "Clara's been planning a welcome dinner for days, convinced you'd return this week." "And the ranch, thriving," Cole said, swinging into his own saddle. "That Chicago buyer came through with an excellent offer for our fall herd. And I've been implementing some of your suggestions for the breeding program." They rode side by side out of town, the familiar landscape of West Texas spreading before them. The August heat was intense, but Margaret found she welcomed it, the dry, clean heat of her chosen home. "Margaret," Cole said as they rode, "I meant what I said before you left. Your choice matters here. If you want to continue as the ranch's business manager, that's what you'll be. If you want more, or something different, that's your decision." Margaret reined her horse to a stop, prompting Cole to do the same. "Do you remember the first words you ever said to me?" she asked. Cole thought for a moment. "Something about being careful, I think, when those men were fighting outside the saloon." "After that," Margaret clarified. "You said small town when I remarked how quickly news traveled." A smile touched Cole's lips. "I was making conversation with the beautiful woman who'd nearly collided with me." "You thought I was beautiful even then?" Margaret asked, pleased. "I thought you were the most striking woman I'd ever seen," Cole admitted. "Even dusty and travel-worn." Margaret's heart warmed at the sincerity in his voice. "My point is this: you spoke to me like a person, not a possession or a prize. That's when I began to feel safe in Fort Stockton." "Because of you," Cole's expression softened. "I'm glad." "I don't need more time to decide what I want," Margaret continued. "I've known since before I left. I want to be your partner, Cole Sutton, in business, in life, in everything." Joy blazed across Cole's face. Dismounting quickly, he moved to help her down from her horse. Once her feet touched the ground, he kept his hands at her waist, looking down at her with such tenderness that Margaret felt tears threaten. "I've been carrying this since the day after you left," Cole said, reaching into his vest pocket. He produced a small, worn velvet box. "It was my mother's." He opened it to reveal a gold ring with a modest but beautifully cut diamond flanked by two small sapphires. "Margaret Mansfield, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." Cole slipped the ring onto her finger, then framed her face with his hands and kissed her a kiss that held all the longing of their separation and all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Margaret smiled up at him. "Perhaps we should continue toward home. Clara's dinner will be waiting." "Let her wait a little longer," Cole murmured, drawing Margaret back into his arms. "I've been waiting for this moment since the day you rode away." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Double S, with Clara serving as Margaret's attendant and the ranch foreman standing up for Cole. Mrs. Rivera prepared a feast that had the ranch hands talking for months afterward, and Mr. Rivera surprised everyone by producing a fiddle and playing for the dancing that continued well into the night. William Mansfield sent a silver tea service and his blessing, promising to visit when his health permitted. Howard Blackwood, Margaret learned later, had been forced to accept significantly less favorable terms for his cotton supply after her father found alternative investors for his expansion plans. Cole and Margaret's honeymoon consisted of a week's journey to San Antonio, where they enjoyed the luxuries of a fine hotel, attended the theater, and purchased books and supplies for the ranch. But both were eager to return home to the Double S. No regrets. Cole asked one evening months later as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His arm was around her shoulders, and her head rested comfortably against him. Inside, the sounds of Mrs. Rivera preparing dinner and Clara practicing the piano created a backdrop of domestic harmony. "None," Margaret replied honestly. "Philadelphia seems like another lifetime now. You don't miss the conveniences. The society," Margaret considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, bookshops, concerts, the changing seasons, but nothing I can't live without." She placed her hand over his. "Everything essential is right here." Cole pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll visit the East someday, see your father, show Clara the sights of Philadelphia and New York." "I'd like that," Margaret agreed, "but not too soon." "No," Cole said contentedly. "We have plenty to do here first." As darkness fell over the Texas landscape, Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her to this place, from a frightened young woman fleeing an unwanted marriage to a confident ranch wife and business partner. She had found not only love but purpose, not only safety but strength. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, noticing her contemplative mood. Margaret smiled up at him. "That sometimes the bravest choice a person can make is to run away from what others expect, and toward what the heart truly desires." Cole's arms tightened around her. "I'm grateful every day that your running led you here." "To the Double S?" Margaret asked teasingly. "To me," Cole replied simply. "To us." Inside the house, Clara called that dinner was ready. Cole stood and offered Margaret his hand, a gesture that had become familiar yet never lost its meaning. An invitation, not a demand. A partnership, not a possession. As they went inside together, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the love of a man who had given her the most precious gift of all: the freedom to choose her own path and the joy of choosing to walk it by his side. In the years that followed, the Double S Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Cole's innovative breeding programs and Margaret's business acumen turned their operation into one of the most successful in West Texas. They welcomed 2 children, first a son they named William Cole, after both their fathers, and later a daughter, Catherine Elena, honoring their mothers. William Mansfield eventually made the journey to Texas, arriving with some trepidation but departing with genuine respect for his son-in-law and the life his daughter had built. Clara married a young doctor who established a practice in Fort Stockton, allowing the siblings to remain close while each building their own legacy. And on summer evenings, long after the children were grown with families of their own, Cole and Margaret could still be found sitting together on the porch of the Double S, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in colors no Eastern artist could capture, their hands linked in the enduring bond of a love freely chosen and faithfully kept.